Hello and welcome to the LifeWorks podcast. Joining me today is Lauren Anderson. Lauren, it's great to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
So Lauren, I want to jump right in. What would you say has been the impact of the last several years on mental health in general?
Yeah, that's a heavy question. And I think we're still trying to understand and grapple with all of the changes that we've experienced with not only the pandemic, but also a lot of the social unrest, George Floyd, and the protests, and just our nation coming to terms with the fact that institutional systemic racism has been very much a pillar of our country for the past couple hundred years. I think that we're still trying to understand that. What we are seeing, statistics are unfortunately pointing to negative effects. The work that I do is particularly with teens. So I can reference a study done the summer of last year in which over 30% of teens agreed that the pandemic had worsened their mental health. And the year before, which is a stat a lot of people heard early on in the pandemic, is that about 25% of 18 to 24-year-olds had experienced suicidal ideation due to the pandemic, right? Those were like the early months of the changes. And you think about that age group, those are folks that were off in college, maybe for their first time or launching into their adult life in whatever way. And then for it to be pulled out from underneath them, I think there's a lot of just the uncertainty and the heaviness of that on our mental health. And speaking to the social unrest, but also just the way that the pandemic has disproportionately impacted Black and Brown communities. And so just the additional weight on some of marginalized communities impacts mental health. One thing that we're seeing is the suicide rate of Black youth is growing faster than any other ethnicity group. Black boys under the age of 13 are 3 times more likely to die by suicide than their white peers. The U.S. Surgeon General issued a rare public health advisory, basically calling attention to the mental health crisis for youth. It's heavy because I think even leading up to the pandemic, we were seeing just the mental health crisis. And then you add on just what the pandemic has done, which has created a lot of uncertainty, right, about just daily life and a lot of adjustment, especially for young folks that thrive in more structure and being able to know what their next day is going to look like. And especially with young kids, it's almost like any type of change, you have to start to introduce that, really talk about it. And so to have big changes happening overnight, it does a lot for one's self of safety and then the effects on anxiety and all of that. It's a heavy question. And I think we're still grappling with where we are and what we can do to move forward. One silver lining is that we're talking about mental health more. And I think that the pandemic has pushed our country and everyone to experience something very similar. And so there's a shared collective experience, right? That we can also have a shared dialogue around, like, how has this affected your mental health, is even the words being used.
So what motivated you and your family to start the Josh Anderson Foundation, or what is now Our Minds Matter?
It's a personal experience. Josh was my younger brother, youngest of 4 kids. So I fell second in the lineup. So he was the 4th. And when he was a junior in high school in 2009, he died by suicide. And our family, it was a complete shock. He was experiencing difficulties with some school disciplinary issues, but he also was an engaged student athlete in his community. So he wasn't necessarily isolated, or what you might think of a kid really struggling. So he had lots of friends. He had a girlfriend at the time. He was one of the star football players at his school. He was getting recruited to play football, even at the college level. And he was facing some issues. And I think that all of that just built up, and then he didn't have the language or the tools to speak about that and seek help in the way that he needed. our family, we wanted to do something that affected teens locally here in the DC metro area. Fairfax County is where we grew up and went through the school system. And we really felt that even if there are other interventions or initiatives in place, so adults being aware of maybe signs or symptoms, or there being counselors or professionals at the school level, that really teens and young people have to directly understand and be aware of signs and symptoms related to mental health issues and know resources and feel empowered to seek help and talk about these issues and have it be more normalized. I think that the stigma is definitely one of the largest obstacles that halted Josh from being able to really talk about what he was feeling and thinking.
What were some of the signs that you noticed or may have noticed in hindsight with regard to Josh?
Some of it is firsthand, but at this time I was away in college, and even the summer before had done an internship elsewhere. So I hadn't really been home for the last year of Josh's life. And I experienced it firsthand, but definitely hearing from my parents. I think there were some signs of underlying potentially depression, the sleeping a lot, or even though he was such a star athlete, there was even the needing encouragement, motivation for practice and getting ready and all of those things, which was hard because I think that you also might think of that as like typical teenage behavior, sleeping a lot and being like a grumble about needing to get ready and get out the door and do homework. So I think that's what's really hard. And I think what a lot of parents have difficulty with is how to really understand what's typical teenage behavior and then what is behavior that needs more attention. Josh was basically, he had been expelled from school, and that is ultimately what contributed to, I think, the down spiral. So what I would say for any parent is that check in, be really aware when something drastically changes. And it could be anything from, right, like a breakup, a wanting, the kid has been dying to go to that school, college or university, and then maybe they don't get into that school and it's a big loss. So any type of loss or change, I think that's a time to really check in with your kid and have those conversations about how it's really affecting them, how they're feeling. And obviously that is easier said than done, but also easier if there just generally is an open line of communication. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is that to normalize that it's okay to have big feelings and it's okay to feel uncertain, stressed, anxious, depressed, but to have some language around that and be able to talk about that a little bit more freely.
What are the outward signs that a person might be at risk?
Everyone's quite different in how they present, and someone who is quite reclusive and more of an introvert and all of that might just be how they thrive. They love being alone in their space and doing their own thing, whereas someone else that, like myself, I'm quite social and I get energy from that, and we're quite different. And so it would be hard to really set standard signs. I think what I would say is anytime there's significant changes in behavior and changes in behavior over a certain amount of time. For instance, myself, like my general personality is to be more outgoing, to want to be around people, to seek out opportunities of social interaction. And then if say for a week, 2 weeks, I become quite reclusive. I'm not seeking out those social opportunities. I'm staying to my room. I'm not wanting to talk to others. That is a sign that something is going on, and maybe that there needs to be some dialogue around that. Another example is if someone generally is a good sleeper, like gets 8 hours of sleep every night, that's their sleep habits. And then all of a sudden they're not able to sleep at all. Like that's becoming really difficult, or they're oversleeping, right? Like you're going from a normal sleep routine to sleeping throughout the day. That would be a time to check in and what is contributing to all of that.
What would you advise to parents to really open the doors for these kind of conversations? If perhaps they haven't had an open channel before, what would you advise to them?
So I think that there's a couple ways to open up the door. I think that fortunately now there's a lot of teen celebrities or athletes or kind of public figures that are seen highly in teens' minds and that have been open about their own struggles around mental health. So that could be a good kind of reference point. Hey, I read this article about Selena Gomez opening up about her mental health. She's even launching this organization that's all about keeping like a fitness around your mental health. That's cool. What do you think about that? Or so I think that there are current events that can open up that door so it's a little more natural. I think another idea that's very impactful is being authentic and honest and open about oneself, about one's own mental health or well-being, kind of again normalizing the it's okay to not be okay. I think that kids and teens, even if they don't want to admit it, I think that they do see their parents and kind of model some of that behavior. And especially if parents are not themselves open to those discussions, then the kid is going to feel that it's not okay to talk about these things. And so I think it can be very helpful for the parent to proactively talk about oneself in that way and open up those lines of communication around their own mental health, feelings, emotions. And then that kind of is opening the door for their kid or teen to do the same.
What do you think are some of the obstacles for teenagers to really open up and talk about these things?
Yeah, I think that teens, it's a tough time of development because there's so much going on, right? It's this kind of push and pull of wanting independence and wanting to define one's own self, but still needing oversight and parenting and support. And so it's this constant battle. And then I think too, it's finding one's own identity at a time though when things are very socially almost motivated and defined. It's very collective in a sense of like, where's your belonging, your tribe, your group of people. I think it's constantly this kind of internal struggles. And then not to mention talking about kind of technology and just in-person versus virtual, whether that's on the phone or screen or whatever. And as technology has increased for how teens are communicating with one another, I think on one side, it can oftentimes be a way for teens to kind of find potentially like more of their tribe per se. Say they're in a rural area and there's not a lot in terms of their interests right around there. They can maybe go to an online community and join folks that have like very similar interests or that kind of thing. So I think that there are benefits, but I also think that there's a little bit of a loss in terms of just the in-person reading different cues, social cues, being able to be a little bit more spontaneous with reactions and responses. Teens today have learned how to kind of craft a message and then almost like on the spot, it's a little bit more difficult. I think too, it's also dealing with this. Am I really being authentic? Because there's this pressure to, with the different apps like Instagram and Facebook. Facebook is a little bit like too old now, but with some of these apps, it's presenting like your perfectly curated, filtered view picture from the day. And you scroll through and it can become this whole life is better than mine kind of thing. And so it's even what's authentic and how can this online world really, it's a struggle, it's an uphill climb to be authentic and to feel viewed for your authentic self and liked and respected for your authentic self. I think there are a lot of challenges that teens are facing.
I want to go back to Josh for just a moment, knowing that hindsight is always 2020. If you could go back and intervene with Josh, what would you and your family do differently, knowing what you know now about mental health?
I think that opening up those lines of communication way earlier, I think, again, my parents chalked up the lack of motivation or some of that. Honestly, at times, probably even as he's not listening or like rebellious behavior. So looking at it more punitive versus, hey, what's going on here? Can we talk about what is it that you're feeling that might contribute to you not having motivation to get ready for football practice, or just opening up those lines of communication, I think, a little bit earlier and more organically, because then there could have been some expression on his part that would have pointed to some underlying depression that needed to get addressed, maybe seek out mental health treatment, therapy, different things like that. So I think that for sure. But then definitely when he was expelled from his school and that loss of being at school, loss of the community at school, his uncertainty then around what that meant for his next step, right? Because as I mentioned, he was being recruited for football and different things. And I think there wasn't again, hindsight's 2020, but really checking in. And I think it was hard for my parents because he was in trouble. That behavior that gets you expelled from school is not condoned, but how can we also have a support system in place for this really difficult time that you're going through? And how can we have open lines of communication around it? How can we talk about what options there are going forward? Again, that's why I say it definitely takes being aware of what's going on in your kid's life to begin with, to even know when there are some of those changes, because it might not be as dramatic as being expelled from school. It might be a breakup or something else that might not seem like the end of the world, but to a teen, especially with the lack of the prefrontal cortex development, like the inability to see and really see that this is temporary, this isn't my whole experience. So I think that anytime something like that happens, that's a chance, that's really an opportunity to check in with your teen.
Why do you think that there's such a stigma around mental health?
We can't see it physically, right? When I talk about stigma, I often relate it to physical illnesses and issues, right? You break your arm and you're in a cast, and maybe it's this sucks. I'm thinking about it from a teen's lens. Like maybe I've played sports, I can't do that, or I can't play my instrument right now, or I need help like carrying my books. This isn't like ideal, but there's not a like I'm embarrassed that my that I have a cast on. It almost is, hey, let me sign your cast. It almost is a rallying around. And so it's physical. We can see it. Even other cancer tumors show up in MRIs, and you can point to something that's creating a problem within your body system. I think with mental health, you can't see it, right? So we can't see necessarily something physical that points to this is contributing to the way that I feel. If it's depression, a sense of hopelessness, or just kind of a gray, muted feeling, you can't necessarily point to anything tangible. And so there then becomes both internally and how the world views, is this my fault? What's wrong with me? What did I do? I'm not doing something right. Or it becomes internalized, whereas we wouldn't do that with maybe you were clumsy and you fell, and that's maybe why you broke your arm, but it's not what's wrong with me. Why did I break my arm? And so I think that that happens, but then also externally, people can also have those kind of judgments of maybe they're not trying hard enough, maybe they're just a little bit weaker, or different things like that, because there's not we can see tangibly that something is impacting one's thoughts, feelings, behavior. So I liken it to physical illnesses, one, because that's ultimately the way that would be equity of seeing mental health and physical health in a completely balanced way. And I think some of those examples can paint that picture.
So tell us about Our Minds Matter. What is Our Minds Matter doing to solve this huge problem.
Our Minds Matter is a student-led movement to change school culture around mental health. And so we do this by way of student-led clubs that are ambassadors at their school community around mental wellness, mental health promotion, really encouraging social connectedness, help-seeking behavior, the use of positive coping skills under stress, and then pro-social skills, so the ability to recognize signs and symptoms in peers and support them in getting help. What our organization does is we provide all the tools, resources, content, activities, as well as on the ground support for these clubs to be as successful as they can be at really making a difference within their school community. So it's definitely the active members that are a part of the club at their school, the student leaders. We have student leadership trainings that to really equip them not only with mental health literacy, but facilitation skills or leadership skills to bring a group together to recruit students to join in, all of that. And yes, it's very much a small group. What the content is accomplishing for these members' own protective factors, but it's also the ripple effect on the rest of the school community around some of those things of stigma and that it's okay to not be okay. And we're in about 130 schools nationwide. We primarily work with school systems in the DC metro area. So we have partnerships with the public school systems, Fairfax County, Montgomery County, DC public schools. And then we work at the central office level to understand how our peer-to-peer initiative can fit into existing initiatives, because we're just one piece of the puzzle, but our piece is engaging students directly in this effort. And I think that especially at that teen adolescent age, that's so important because they are so influenced by their peers. And this is, I think, a very impactful way to try to make a difference around mental health for teens.
So, for teenagers and adults alike, what are some of the ways that people can cope with difficulties and challenges that they face? What are some of the tools and techniques that you suggest through your clubs, through the work that Our Minds Matter is doing?
The kind of outcomes of the clubs, I think, translate very well to just people in general. The first being that sense of social connectedness. And I think really what the clubs do to encourage and foster this are some like opening connection activities that get a little bit to, can we just drop our facade, our armor, our identity as an academic, right? For adults, our identity with whatever our occupation is, or that we're a mom or dad or whatever. And can we just be ourselves and respond to questions? And so the club has different questions that they can respond to that gets a little bit under the surface and then be able to feel that authentic connection. So with adults, I think, again, it doesn't have to be a mental health professional per se, unless there's significant needing to address kind of issues. But how can you encourage that with your partner or your coworkers or your friends to be able to have more of those authentic conversations or about how you're really doing, right? Like a really easy way to do this is like, how have you been feeling? And that just shifts it a little bit from how are you doing? But then it takes like being able to maybe listen if it's not just a quick, like, great, fine, moving on to the next. So social connectedness, I think the help seeking behaviors, if you're noticing changes in behavior or people say, I just don't feel myself, maybe it's time to check in just as you would if you're experiencing physical issues. My stomach's been hurting for the past week or so. You would maybe go see a doctor, make an appointment with a therapist, or just to see what's going on there. Coping skills. So the way I like to think about this is what charges you up. This analogy of phones and even our computers and whatnot, where because we use them to function, we rely on them so much, we have to charge them to make sure that they have enough battery life to sustain our day or our drive if we're using Google Maps or whatever. And similarly, we have a charge. What are activities or things that help you feel more charged. And it's different for everyone. For me, it's yoga and putting my phone away and doing a walk with my dogs, where I come back feeling a little bit more full within my tank. And so I think that's something that definitely adults can benefit from, as well as finding what are those activities that do that for you. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. It could just be 10 deep breaths before going into a meeting or something like that. So that's what I would suggest that adults can also do to help their mental health and well-being.
I want to shift the questions a little bit to more general life and business lessons learned questions. If you could share one secret of your success, because you've been a very successful individual, what would that secret of success for you be?
I've always had a part of me that believes it can be done, even if it doesn't seem like it's possible, or I'm being told that it can't happen. I have interest to prove that we can accomplish this. I've definitely had kind of doors close and things not work out, but not letting that pull me down and seek out where are there other opportunities, or how can I pivot or learn from this, but move forward and keep moving forward. It's innate maybe in how I'm built, but I think that's been critical to building something, is that it's definitely not all just smooth sailing. There's a lot of times where, honestly, with a small nonprofit, it feels like cart before the horse before the cart, when you could get really just stunted or just frozen in that space. But where can we move forward? Can we maybe take this leap a little bit? And I also would say that with that, especially with Our Minds Matter, the North Star has stayed the same in terms of equipping students directly with skills, resources, tools to better their own mental health and well-being. And so as long as we stay focused on that North Star, sometimes it looks a little bit different. It's not a straight linear line, but that has always been the goal. And I think staying true to that has also been a really important part of this.
What is the greatest lesson that you've ever learned, either in life or in business?
I think for me, it's been whenever I have felt nervous about something or felt like I'm not worthy. I think coming back to just being authentic, if I can just be authentic, because there are times where I want to seem like something. I'm a young leader of a nonprofit. I want to seem like an executive and whatnot. But I think it's more just be myself again, stay true to like the North Star of what we're trying to do. I think that sometimes how I am able to just be more grounded and connect with people helps with making partnerships or connecting with different people, and get out of any type of I should be more like this or trying to be. I recognize that anytime I'm trying, like with that in quotes, then that's where it goes awry for me. So I think I try to come back to, and I do yoga and mindfulness and all that, but just like feeling my feet on the ground, like taking a couple breaths, and can I just be myself in this experience? And that's served me.
If you could offer one piece of advice to the world, what would it be?
To not be scared to be vulnerable and to share what's really going on for you, again, underneath the armor, underneath the identity, because everyone is likely experiencing some piece of that. And I think it would serve well. It would also just make our community collective experience stronger.
So I've asked you a lot of questions today, Lauren. The work that you're doing is amazing. And to see its growth and to see the kind of publicity that you're getting, to see the enthusiasm behind it, it's really inspiring. And what's amazing for me personally is just to see you, your journey, the journey of your family, and where you've ended up and what you're doing to really make the world a better place and really leave it better than you found it. I'm really happy for you, and I'm really grateful that we've been able to spend this time together. It's been such a privilege to spend this time with you, Lauren. Thank you for being with me.
Yeah, it's been great. So thank you.
Hey guys, thanks for watching and listening. Hit the subscribe button and you'll never miss an episode. And check out some of these other clips from the podcast.